I want to zero in, before we kind of get started on the message, zero in again on that Proverbs verse where it says, in the rooms there is beautiful and rare treasures. This morning we're going to be looking at one of those rooms. It's going to be this room here. I don't know if you noticed, but in some of those rooms, in the living room, in the family room, they looked kind of nice. They looked, at least some of them looked a little bit nicer than my living room, which begs the question, at least for me, have you ever looked at Zillow, but looked at Zillow for houses that you're like never gonna buy? Right? Have you ever looked through Zillow at those houses? Maybe you're just curious. Maybe you're curious of what your neighbor's house looks like, right? And you kind of go through it. But have you ever looked at houses from Zillow that you're never gonna buy? Or is it just me and I'm just that weird neighbor, right? I don't know. But this kind of phenomenon has kind of come up through the pandemic. And Zillow boasts that over the last 3 years, their listings have increased 50%. There's now 161 million listings on Zillow, which is kind of crazy. But I think kind of the craziest part of it is this idea that over 60% of all houses across America, over 60% of them have been looked up on Zillow regardless of their for sale status. Maybe your house is in that 50%, I don't know. But have you ever looked up those houses on Zillow that you're never gonna buy? When I do, I start with a modest budget, guys. I start with like a 3-bed house, two bath, nothing big, right? But then, in about 15 minutes or so, I am looking at $30 million houses on the beach with an open concept kitchen, right? And those glass doors that open up and you can see the sunrise every single morning. It's got like 4 theaters and like 16 beds and 17 baths. Why you need more baths than beds, I don't know, but this house has it, right? And it has like a 3-level deck. On the top level is like an Olympic swimming pool, and on the middle level is a little bit of a smaller pool, right? And on the bottom is a hot tub. And then you walk from the hot tub and you're like on your own sand volleyball court. It's amazing. And in this Zillow listing, you own your own private ocean. Right? Like those are the type of listings that I look up on Zillow. I don't know about you. But as much as there are cool listings on Zillow, if you look hard enough, there are some really weird listings on Zillow. I don't know if you've had the chance to look at them, but there's this one right here, and it looks like an okay house. You might not want to move there with that much snow, but maybe you do, I don't know. And then you start looking at the listing pictures, and you're like, all right, well, I'm going to need to clean up a little bit when I get the house. And then you look at the next one, and you're like, all right, I'm really going to have to scrub something when I buy this house. But then you turn that corner there. Do you know what you're greeted by? What? That's mannequins. That's mannequins in ball gowns. And don't worry, they have some friends. They have some friends that they're hanging out with. And then you get this picture, which is just like, that borderline's creepy. Like that mannequin's looking weird. And if you look under the countertop, there's a mannequin without arms on it. Like, I don't know what this house is doing. There's some weird listings on Zillow. How about this one? This one's in the country. Some people like to live in the country a little bit more than they do the city. This is the house for you. It has some character to it. You get to the kitchen, you're like, all right, spacious. You kind of see the character of that house in the window. All right, it's got some of that old school charm, doesn't it? And then you get upstairs and you're like, maybe too much character, right? Like maybe that's too much. But then the character really takes a dark turn down in the basement. You're like, what is that? Is that a jail? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's a jail. That's a jail in the basement. And you're like, too much character. Not the house for me. I don't even want to know what they were doing. But we started with that house, and it kind of looked okay, and then it took a dark turn. Here, you just know this house is going to be weird. Like, at least it's weird on the outside, and you look on the inside, and sure enough, it's carried that weird theme throughout. Not the house for me personally. You look at this house. All right, we're back to kind of semi-normal houses, right? You look through this one, and you're like, all right, like the kitchen. It's spacious. It's got a lot of storage to it, doesn't it? Then you get to the bedroom, and you're like, it does have a lot of storage to it, doesn't it? And then you walk through the hallway, and you're like, how much storage do you really need? And then you get to this room. Apparently a lot. Right? Apparently you need a lot of storage. I don't know what you're storing in there, but I don't have enough stuff to store in there. Then you get to this one. All right, we're back to normal houses, right? This is nice, beautiful house, except for the fact that Christmas threw up in this house. Like, it is just Christmas everywhere. Like, I love Christmas, y'all, don't get me wrong, but this room, too much Christmas. Too much Christmas. Why do we look through Zillow listings, right? We're starting a 4-week teaching series here at St. Peter's that we're calling Faith in the Home. And the big idea behind it is that we're just simply looking to see how we can have spiritually vibrant homes. How faith can be embraced in and as our household. Now, faith from ancient of times has thrived in and as the household. Think about, for example, Noah. Noah in the flood, was it just Noah that was saved, or was it Noah's household? Right? It was 8 souls in all is what Scripture tells us. Abraham. God chose that Jesus' genealogy would go through Abraham. But was it Abraham, or was it Abraham's household that God worked through, right? It was Abraham, it was Sarah, it was their kids, it was Lot, it was his wife, it was their kids, right? It was all of Abraham's household. Think of the people, the Israelites coming out of Egypt, right? They were in Egypt for a long time, they were in slavery, but God came to Moses and said, Moses, you're going to take my people out, you're going to let my people go. So Moses takes them through the Red Sea on dry ground. They have a party on the other side. They receive the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, but then they decide to rely on themselves and not God. So then they wander around the wilderness for 40 years. But at the end of this 40 years, at the banks of the Jordan River, with the promised land in view, Moses gives this impassioned speech about what life is going to look like on the other side of the river, what faith is going to look like on the other side of the river. Moses roots faith in the household. Here's what he says in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength." Right? He roots the household first in a confession of faith, because everything starts with faith. But then he goes to give the household some spiritual disciplines, if you will. Here's how the house is going to be rooted in faith. He says this: "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads." And finally, he says, "Write them on the doorframes of your house and on your gates." Moses roots faith in and as the household. But I want to pause for a second. Stop. And I want to talk to my people out here who are single. My people out here who are empty nesters, who are grandmas and grandpas, my people out there who don't want to have kids, those people out there that want to have kids but can't, those people out there that want to have kids and it hasn't worked out yet. My guess is that you're probably thinking, I have to endure a 4-week teaching series on households. And my household is 1. Or my household is 2, and I want it to be more. How is this going to apply to me? When we talk about the word household, our modern eyes, we think of the nuclear household, don't we? Like we have the adoring husband and wife, the 2.5 kids, and the white picket fence. Have you ever looked at that up on Zillow, right? That's what our minds think of. Scripture uses household in kind of a different way, a more broad sense. Sure, it certainly includes the kiddos, the mom and dad, but you know who else it includes? The extended family. There were a lot of people living under one roof in scriptural times, right? It included the extended family. It included some of those people that worked for you. It included your close friends. The word household in Scripture is a little bit more like the term we use when we say, that's our people. If I would say to you, who's your people? Who comes to mind? That's kind of the way that Scripture uses the idea of household. It's your people. And our households are really ultimately looking to reflect the household of God, right? The family of faith, the church here. And in fact, when Paul writes a letter to Timothy, who's this young pastor, do you know what he calls the church? He calls it a household of God. 1 Timothy chapter 3. Now, what's fascinating is that as he kind of lays out this idea of faith in the household to a young pastor, he says, hey, you need to relate to people as a household. He says, Timothy, when you talk to guys who are older than you, relate to them as you do your father. And he says, hey, Timothy, when you talk to those women who are older than you, relate to them like you do your mother. And he says, hey, Timothy, when you talk to women who are younger than you, relate to them like you do your sister, right? Care for them, look after them, annoy them, poke at them, right? No. That's not what he said, right? But we are to relate to one another in the church as a household. And perhaps some of the most stark words of all Scripture on households comes from Paul himself to Timothy when he's kind of laying out this idea. He says this in 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Stark words from Paul. But the idea is that faith thrives in the household. Faith in and as the household. Now that's an important truth to remember. Because I think it's really easy to fall into a rut where we think that faith thrives in the church. Now, let me double click on that for a second, right? Because I want to tell you what I mean by that. Because with that statement, you can go into like one of two ruts, which I want to avoid, right? When I say that statement, I want us to keep our beautiful theology of worship. Worship for us is so much more than just coming in feeling good. Church for us is so much more than hearing some moralistic sermon that's going to help your life out. Church for us is so much more than just like some amount of sin management, right? Church for us, worship for us is where we meet Christ. It's Jesus that promises us that he's with us always until the very end of the age. How does he do that? Well, you go to where Jesus has promised to be. Jesus promises to be in the water combined with the word in the waters of baptism. Jesus promised to be in, with and under the bread and the wine that you just partook of. In communion, we encounter Christ. Jesus was promised to be where his word is preached and taught and read and heard. God promises to locate himself in God's word. So for us, church is of the utmost importance because it's in church where we encounter Christ. Is Christ other places? Absolutely he is. But he promises to locate himself here. But it's that same Savior that we worship that has made the week 168 hours. And for most of us, church is anywhere from 1 to 2 hours a week, which means that you then have 166 hours to embrace the faith in and as a household. Faith thrives in and as the household. Think about it like this, if you will. I would say faith in and as the household is a little bit more like a furnace or it's a little bit more like a fire and a little less like a furnace. Now, let me explain, okay? Fall is coming. We can feel it, right? I was outside greeting people for 10 minutes before church and my hands are still cold, right? I'm assuming at some point, probably in the next month or so, you're probably going to have to turn on the heat in your house. Now, there's 2 ways to heat a house, right? The first way is a furnace, which is like the easiest, most convenient way, right? Because you walk over to the thermostat. Dad walks over to the thermostat because you know nobody else can touch the thermostat. You walk over to the thermostat and you adjust it to your exact temperature that you want. And then what do? You walk away. There's nothing else you need to do. You don't need to sit there and look at it, right? Because you know that when it gets to a certain point, the furnace is going to kick on and the heat is going to rise. I think when we see the faith thriving only in the church, that's a little bit it, right? I just need to get my kids to church. Just need to get my parents to church. Just need to get my neighbor to church. I just need to get my aunt, my uncle, whoever it is, my friend to church, and then I step away. And the church does the rest. But I would say that faith is a little bit more like a fire. Look, there's something mesmerizing about a fire, isn't there? Like the play of fire off the logs, like it's mesmerizing. But it's also a bunch of work, right? You need to get kindling. You need to get some paper to put under the kindling. You need to get bigger sticks to put over the kindling. Then you need to get logs. And then you need to make sure that you have a match or a lighter of some type so that you can then light the paper, that then lights the kindling, that then lights the bigger wood, that then lights the logs, right? And then you usually need to blow into it to give it a little bit more heat or a little bit more power. And then finally, the fire is going. And then you realize you need more logs. So then you go, you get more logs, you put it on, and you poke it, and you prod it, and you make sure that it's still hot. And you can't leave a fire unattended for too long, or else it'll go out. I think that's a little bit more what faith in and as the household is. It's a lot of work. It's poking. It's prodding, but there is something mesmerizing about faith lived in and as the household. By the way, I've heard nobody say, you know what, I've had a really long week. My family has had a really long week, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to gather up to the family. We're going to gather around a thermostat, right? And we're going to watch as we lower it just 1 degree. And that was so relaxing. Nobody says that. But what do they say? It's been a long week. Gather the family around a fire, right? And it warms the family. There's something mesmerizing about a fire. There's something mesmerizing about living faith in and as the household. Now, maybe you have a fireplace in your living room. Maybe you don't. But let me ask you this question. If you would be so bold, right? You'd be so bold to say, Pastor Adam, I want you over to my house after worship. What does your living room look like right now? What would I be walking into? I can tell you what ours looks like. If you would be walking into ours, a mess, right? There'd be stuff everywhere. And I found out that I'm in the majority, okay? There was a survey that went out in 2021 that surveyed over 2,000 people with one question: which room is the messiest room in your house? Do you know what a majority of them said? It was the living room, followed closely by the kitchen, because dishes are never done, and then followed by the primary bedroom. But I'm convinced that everybody who said the primary bedroom entertained people the night before. Because you know what happens when you entertain people the night before and you don't have time to pick up your stuff? Where does it go? Whoop! Into my bedroom, right? The living room is a messy place. According to the survey, the 4 culprits that make the living room messy, they are unfolded baskets of laundry. That hits me home. It is shoes. People take the shoes off and leave them. It's kids' toys, and it's crumbs, dirt, and debris. Does that describe your living room at all? It might be a little bit of a mess, because our living room is, get ready for it, this is going to blow your mind, lived in. That's why it's called a living room. It's not a dining room, right? It's a living room. You live in it. In anywhere where life is lived, a mess is soon to follow. Let me ask you a question. How do you relate to God in the mess of this world? How do you relate to God in the mess of your life? How do you relate to God when your kiddo is throwing their 10th temper tantrum of the day? And this one because you had the audacity to turn the show Bluey off, right? How do you relate to God when your best friend is sitting in your living room on the couch with you, crying because they got the news that they didn't want? How do you relate to God when your parents throw out the word divorce? How do you relate to God in the mess of this world? I can tell you how some people relate to God, or how some people would tell you to relate to Him. They would say, you know what? You just need a little bit more confidence. Don't you know that everything's going to work out at the end? You need a little bit more hope. You need a little bit more trust in what Jesus is doing in your life. Some people would say you need to clean up the mess, right? Clean up and then carry on. Get yourself a little spiritual Roomba, if you will, right? But each and every one of those answers points back to yourself, something that you need to do in the mess of this world. When you are in the mess of this world, this Lutheran pastor will never point you to yourself, but will always point you to what Christ has done for you. Because a mess, that's basically why Jesus came, right? He came down, he saw the mess, and he's like, all right, I can help out with this. Think back to the Israelites, the ones who crossed through the Red Sea on dry ground, right? The impassioned speech from Moses. Do you know why God saved the Israelites? It tells us. It tells us in Exodus chapter 2, it says this: God heard their groaning. And he remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God hears your groaning. God sees your mess. And just like he did for Israel, just like he did in Egypt, he comes down through his life, his death, his resurrection, and he takes care of the sin in your life that caused the mess. So then the question is, how do we relate to God? How do we relate to God in the mess of this world? Jesus taught about that. In his life, when he went through and he would teach the crowd, he was teaching them how to relate to God. It's consistent through Scripture. Perhaps the clearest teaching is in prayer, where Jesus teaches us what? Our Father. That's how you relate to God. You relate to God just like an earthly father picks up his kid after they scrape their knee. Just like an earthly father comforts their child after they experience the brokenness of this world. You relate to God as he is your Father. You pray, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name." You have God's name upon your life. And nothing can take Christ's name off of you. That's his promise. You pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." God, give me what I need to get through this mess. And then you pray these words: "Thy will be done." That's the promise that you hold on to in the mess of this world. That nothing can subvert God's will. That God has willed to give you the riches of the inheritance of God. They're yours. And God wills Christ to come back and clean up the mess of your life and the entire world. To help us become spiritually vibrant homes. In the center pews there, if you got really good neighbors that are sitting right there in the center, they can pass those down, and those are bookmarks. And they have some suggestions of ways that you can become spiritually vibrant in your house. Practices, spiritual disciplines, if you will, that you can undertake. We're going to give one of these out every single message during this series, and we hope that you take one of these this week and put them into your household with your people. Come soon, Lord Jesus. Amen.